let's go ahead and get things kicked off. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining our webinar this afternoon, A Guide to Building Custom Forms with Delivered 9.2 Tools. I will put a disclaimer on here. I know that there are folks that reached out to me in advance of the webinar thinking, oh, this is all going to be about building GTE forms for PeopleSoft. And there'll be a little bit of that toward the end. But really the focus of our webinar today is to walk through the different options that you've got of assembled tools within your delivered PeopleSoft and People tools that you can use to build out custom, intelligent electronic forms, all within your delivered PeopleSoft system. So Paul Taylor is going to walk through some of those options, show you how that can be done, and then we will do a little bit of a peek at GTE forms in terms of how to make it easier on yourself. My name is Scott Anton with Gideon Taylor, and again, I'd like to welcome you this afternoon. A little bit of housekeeping. If you've got questions, which we highly encourage, please feel free to enter those into the chat or pose them in the Q&A tool. We're more than happy to take a pause and respond to those as we go along. Paul, if you want to go ahead and advance.
There we go.
We do have our next PeopleSoft Master Series webinar scheduled in July. We host these on a monthly basis. That one is titled Optimizing and Extending the Manager's Experience in PeopleSoft HCM 9.2. And we're going to be walking through the tools primarily configuration-based within PeopleSoft 9.2 that you can use to build out and extend manager self-service. And that includes activity guides, guided self-service, the approval framework, page composer, and the questionnaire and I think notifications frameworks. So join us for that. Following this webinar, you will be getting an email with a link to access the recording of this afternoon's webinar, and there'll also be information in terms of how to register for the one in July. You can also find links to that on our website. For those of you who might not be familiar with Gideon Taylor, we've been working with PeopleSoft since about 2001. We started as a PeopleSoft consultancy, helping organizations implement, upgrade, and optimize their PeopleSoft systems. Our focus over the last 17 years, 18 years, 19 years now, has really evolved to emphasize helping organizations drive greater value and greater productivity out of their PeopleSoft systems. And we do that primarily through workflow-enabled electronic forms. That can encompass any number of different tools, some of which you'll see this afternoon, and also our very own GTE forms. And I'm sure that there are many folks on the call this afternoon that use GTE forms within your various PeopleSoft applications. Our vision today is to help our clients work simply, effectively, efficiently, and flexibly. There are some logos down on this, down toward the bottom that I'll point out. One, we're a longtime Oracle partner, and also GTE Forms, the tool that I just mentioned, is Oracle certified. It is the only forms builder that has gone through the Oracle Validated Integration Program for PeopleSoft, so a good stamp of approval from our good friends at Oracle. As I mentioned, we'll be covering a few of these tools today, and then we'll also be covering tools on our July webinar that enable the creation of custom self-service solutions. So at the top of this list, GTE Forms is a favorite of ours. Guided self-service and activity guides, page and field configurator, drop zones, PeopleSoft Forms Approval Builder, and custom development with the approval framework. There is a lot that you can do with delivered PeopleSoft, and there's a lot that you can do in terms of adding GTE Forms functionality to your PeopleSoft applications to drive greater productivity, greater efficiency, and custom self-service solutions the way that you would want them to be designed. This is what we like to refer to as our NASCAR slide. This just gives you a sense of some of the organizations that we've had the pleasure of working with over the years. All of these organizations are obviously PeopleSoft shops, and all of them use GTE Forms to automate different processes throughout PeopleSoft HCM, Campus Solutions, and their financials applications. And that is my preamble. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Paul Taylor, President and CEO of Gideon Taylor Consulting. He's going to be our keynote this afternoon. And again, Paul, whenever you'd like me to launch the poll, just let me know. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining. Scott, do you like my my new updated picture that doesn't look like it's 15 years old, even though it was only 6 years old?
It looks like you're either ready to go scuba diving or parachuting, sky jumping, whatever that's called.
Close. It was not quite that extreme. That is at the Dead Sea, just before jumping in and enjoying the therapeutic waters of the
nice.
The mineral-rich therapeutic waters of the Dead Sea. Thanks for the introduction, Scott. So as Scott said, here we're focusing mostly on, well, back up and say, as we said here a couple slides ago, our focus is really on building custom solutions for PeopleSoft customers. We do a lot of that using our tool sets, which includes GT eForms, but we also will build custom forms using delivered tools and build custom solutions using other tools for clients who are not GT eForms users. Those of you who are GT eForms users, this will be a great, this session will be a great validation of why it's great to have GT eForms, because we'll be going over basically what it's like to build a form without it. The tools that are used that we go over here are also pertinent to GT eForms development. So it's not a waste for you to see how this is done, but you'll have a different perspective and a different appreciation for GT eForms, considering the other tools that are available. So we'll be going through basically what constitutes a custom form, the tools and best practices that are available with delivered 9.2 with delivered 9.2 systems. Those include fluid development, activity guides, the approval framework, and approval page composer. All of those have a role in GT eForms based automations as well, which we will discuss. And then we will give a comparison with between delivered tools and development of forms using GT eForms, and we'll try to leave some time for questions at the end. So when we say a custom form, what are we really saying there? First, and I'm sorry, let's go ahead and launch the poll at this point. So if you are using a version of GT eForms, choose the one. If you don't know what version it is, then say that you don't know which version. If you know that you do not have GT eForms, then choose not applicable. We'll give you a minute to go through here, and this will give us a little bit of context to refer to GT eForms and what you can do with the version that you're on. It looks like we, of those who are GT eForms customers, that there are quite a few on more recent versions. So that is great.
We'll leave it open for a couple more seconds here and let folks jump in if they haven't already. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the polling.
Okay, very good. So we're sharing results here. So like I said, we've got, there are a lot of people who are not GT eForms clients on the call, and that's great. We'll have a lot of very pertinent information for you. And those of you who are GT eForms clients, like I said, you'll be able to compare what you've got with delivered tools and see how we use delivered tools in GT eForms development. Okay, so we'll go on with the deck here. A custom form, what we're considering a custom form, is something that is not a delivered PeopleSoft transaction, that has a mobile UI that's accessible to casual users, that delivers reasonably robust functionality. And when I say that, and that of course that's somewhat subjective, but we rarely see form requirements that don't involve some degree of dynamic changes to the forms, of logic statements that hide or unhide fields, edits that need to be applied, of course, workflow that happens at the end of the form, like we're indicating here, the ability to restrict valid values, to have a form that naturally unfolds as people fill it out. And usually a form needs to update a delivered PeopleSoft component at the end. So that's what we're talking about when we say a custom form in 9.2. And really this this whole session is addressing the question of, well, what if I didn't have GT eForms to build a custom form for a client, how would I build it? What is the best way to use delivered 9.2 tools to build custom forms? So here are the tools that we will look at specifically in detail. The fluid user interface is the underpinning for especially for a mobile experience and for a casual user experience. Activity guides are going to help us with navigation. The approval framework will help us with workflow, and we'll integrate that with fluid approvals in order to consume the workflow routings that happen. And then we'll also take a look at Page Composer, which really, we should say approval page composer, because you can only build approval pages with it. We'll come back to that. So here are some things that we won't cover. We're not going to cover Forms and Approval Builder. The reason is that it is not reasonably robust. It was not intended to, it was really intended to replace a paper form, a simple paper form, to collect some data and be able to save it to a table. It is not intended to build a full-featured custom form application that's dynamic. So we will not be covering it. We do have a session on our website, some videos on our YouTube channel that go over how to build forms with Forms and Approval Builder and that cover some of the limitations. So would recommend that you look at that if you're considering Forms and Approval Builder. HCM guided self-service, we will not be covering. We will be covering it in our next webinar. We'll not cover it here because it is not really custom. It's configurable, but it's not a custom tool. You can't use it to build custom forms. You can turn fields on and off with of the ones that are delivered, but not build something from scratch. Page and field configurator is great, but it is really there to configure delivered pages, not to build new pages or forms. And there are some new frameworks that are available, including the acknowledgement framework, the questionnaire framework, and these are great, and we use them, but they're really for limited use cases. They're not really supporting a full custom form experience, including that dynamic behavior that we've been talking about. So, to build a custom form, a reasonably robust custom form, there are a few pieces that we need to use. To build pages and fields, there really isn't a better way with delivered tools to build a page than just building a fluid page. So you end up doing fluid development in order to put fields on pages and put pages in front of your users. You do, however, have a navigation framework that is configuration based in the activity guide framework, and Oracle continues to invest in activity guides, and activity guides become more and more custom or more configurable as we move forward with each PUM release. We also then need to do workflow, and so the delivered tool to do workflow is the approval framework, AWE. In order to use the approval framework in a robust fashion, you need to be able to identify who gets the routing, when they get the routing, as in under what conditions routings happen, how they access those routings, and for that we would use fluid approvals for in a 9.2 delivered tools setting, and what they see when they access those routings would be delivered using Page Composer. So this is the general framework that we're going to go over. We're going to look at each of the pieces, but all of these then would work together to give the custom form experience. And it's important to think about these tools as fitting together and how they fit together, because the individual tools don't necessarily give you an experience, an end-to-end experience. You have to combine them in order to get the end-to-end experience of going from form initiation through workflow and to system update. So we'll start with fluid development here. So a few things to consider. The fluid interface, there are a lot of pros. It is native, responsive mobile PeopleSoft experience, lets you fill out forms on a phone, on a tablet. It's responsive design, meaning that the way that the form displays changes based on the screen size that's available. It gets more and more stable. It trends toward greater stability. There are often hiccups with new PUM releases that it goes up and down, but it's getting there, and it's here to stay. PeopleSoft is systematically retiring classic components and replacing them with fluid components, and that will continue to happen. So it's a good thing that you can invest in developing on the fluid platform, and it's not going to go away. The cons include that it's just still really hard to develop in. It adds a layer of complexity to development in PeopleSoft that is a considerable learning curve, and even after the learning curve, there are just quirks and challenges to fluid development. So there is a common misconception. People will say, oh, well, I'm not using fluid, or we're not on fluid yet. Really, if you're on 9.2, you're on fluid. There's some confusion because fluid is used both to refer to a navigation scheme and to a responsive page theme. So scheme. Usually people, when they say we haven't turned on fluid yet, what they mean is we're not using fluid navigation as our default navigation scheme. So it doesn't have to be an all-at-once leap. The changeover as far as navigation is the biggest all-at-once part, but there's nothing keeping you from using fluid pages even if you haven't gone to fluid navigation yet. And in fact, it's getting harder and harder to avoid using fluid pages. You probably already are. So so this is getting to be more broadly understood. There isn't a switch that turns on fluid pages. It's just a question of whether you're navigating to them or not. So you can, even if your organization hasn't switched over to fluid navigation using home pages and tiles and dashboards, you can still build fluid applications. And it's just going to get harder and harder to avoid fluid. That's where Oracle is inexorably going. So fluid development, it's going to be important to be able to do that, and that's going to be the core. It's still, with delivered tools, the best way to build a custom form is just to build the page as a technical developed page if you don't have GTE forms. Next piece we're looking at is the navigation, the activity guide. So an activity guide is a conceptual and visual framework that walks people through an activity that can have multiple save points. You can stop, you can start, you can restart, you can do part of the process. It's great in that respect. So there are a number of different types of activity guides, and we're not going to really get into a big how-to here. This is really an introduction to the concept. We've listed a number of activity guide templates here. One thing to remember also is that there are classic versus fluid activity guides. We're really just interested in talking about fluid activity guides here. So that's what we're talking about here. There are a number of different ways to access an activity guide. I have my favorites. The type of process that's listed, these just turn my brain off every time I read them. It's really difficult to understand what they're talking about. So this will help to disambiguate that. The horizontal means you've got train stops going across the top. We'll show you what that looks like. Optimized is side panel, not optimized is drop down. Guided means you have buttons, non-guided means you don't. Sequential means you have to do it in order, non-sequential means that you don't. So that's to help make sense of what we're talking about here. Really what you want to be looking at is, I think the best approach is optimized, and you probably do want buttons in most situations. Okay, so here is what a train stop looks like. You have these buttons across the top, and you next your way through them, and it shows you where you are in the process. It's limited. You can only have 5. So there are some delivered train stop activity guides. I probably would never develop one myself from scratch. I much prefer the side panel activity guide, where you can see your options here. You have folders that can open up to sub-steps, and each of these has its own status. You can see, the user can see if they have completed an option, if they visited it, if it has not yet been started. The drop-down menu version, I don't know, that's not really of interest to me, but it is an option to have a drop-down menu to choose between the different steps. To me, that's just a great way to make sure that no one knows what they're doing. And then, so out of those options, I'm going to go over in this tool what the configuration-based aspects are that are available. So there are both configuration and technical aspects to activity guides. First, the activity guide, and there are new versions of this, new features that are coming out every time with every release of the activity guide composer. But you basically can build templates, which are the layouts for the activity guide, and it shows the progression across action items. And those action items are pages, a script, a process. You can think of those as being a page. It's something that happens, or that the user interacts with. You can set up security at the config level. You can set up due dates, questionnaires. You can configure dependencies, all sorts of things, so that you can really put together a process that reaches across multiple save points, again, to help someone work through a larger body of work like an onboarding process. PeopleSoft's delivered onboarding solution is delivered as an activity guide. We also have presentations about onboarding specifically on our YouTube channel and on our website that you can go take a look at to get a better look at a real-life implementation of a robust activity guide-based form process. There are technical aspects of activity guide development. That includes that the pages themselves still need to be built technically. So you're still going to have to do fluid development, as we've already talked about. You also have the concept of an instance. What you configure in the setup tables is really the template of the activity guide. An activity guide, an instance of an activity guide, still needs to be triggered technically. That is typically, you're writing some people code and you're saying, when you click this button, we're going to launch and create an instance of this activity guide. So the data for the activity guide is actually stored in, when you build a page and you say, all right, I want to ask the end user to fill out these 3 fields, you still need to build a record to store those 3 fields in. You're still doing basic PeopleSoft development to create a place to store the data. You're responsible for writing any code that pre-populates or that repopulates that form. If you want dynamic and conditional behavior like hiding and unhiding fields, you're writing people code. If you want edits, you're going to have to write people code. If you want lookups, you're going to have to build views and tables and put those on custom records that you're going to build. Same with related displays. This is all still basic PeopleSoft development. Activity guides are not a shortcut to create custom forms. They are a shortcut to manage the navigation between multiple pieces of a custom form. I love activity guides, and we now are, one thing that for GT eForms customers, we will shortly have a template done so that you can launch GT eForms from an activity guide. So an eForm can be an action item in an activity guide. You can have multiple eForms organized together as one process and it can intermingle with custom developed pages, with delivered PeopleSoft pages. Our onboarding template, our onboarding presentation goes over that in a lot of detail. You'll like that. So for a sample activity guide page, this stuff up here in the black box, the shaded area, is what you get with config. This stuff is the stuff you have to develop technically. You still have to build the page, put stuff on the page, load it with data, put a place for the data to be saved. So config, tech. Okay, I should mention, you are welcome to post questions in the Q&A, and I'm happy to answer questions as we go, since we're covering a lot of different topics. If you have questions about activity guides, feel free to throw them in at this point, and anywhere along the way, we'll either answer them in line, or if it makes more sense to wait, we'll ask you to wait, but we're happy to answer questions as we go. Okay, so getting back to approvals, the approval framework is still the way to, it's the best practices way to do workflow in a delivered 9.2 custom form. Remember, there are 4 different questions here: who, when, how, and what. And we address those in different ways using different tools in the delivered framework. So AWE is a workflow engine. It's built to route transactions for approval and send associated notifications to help people get to to work those approvals or those requests. There are config aspects to it, and those config aspects include being able to set up a really robust workflow process that can include multiple stages, multiple paths, multiple steps. You can do serial or parallel approvals. And here you also, in these really kind of, it's a little bit obtuse, these setup tables are a lot to take in, but you can also do the who and when questions as in configuration here by setting up user lists and criteria. The additional things that you can do in config, you can set up, again, you can set up some configurable approval list options. So you can identify certain user lists or role names. You have a few different features that you can set, like allowing or disallowing self-approval, requiring certain approvals, or setting a threshold of how many approvals you need. All that is configurable. You do have some configurable workflow criteria, but not as many. And you get simple email and work list notifications. The notification framework that just came out does expand your opportunities in terms of workflow, or in terms of notifications, and it's very welcome because, but again, that's really recent PUMs. Most 9.2 installations still have very simple notifications. So then there are tech aspects. Again, this is a tool that's partially config and partially tech. To set up the hooks of when a workflow is going to get kicked off, that needs to be coded. So there's code that says start this workflow. Updates to workflow status outside of the fluid application would need to be coded. So if you needed to be able to say that, okay, we're going to go through and update in bulk a number of workflow status settings, or clean up ones that are orphaned, that's all, that all has to be coded, including if you are using custom pages where you want people to do the approvals. User lists that have any complexity to them, such as I need to be able to send only to the people who have department security for the department for which this form is being sent, that's going to have to be coded. Criteria of any complexity. So if you say, I want to skip this step if this person is a student, or if the subject is a student, that's going to have to be coded. Any notifications where you're putting form data into the notifications, or you want it to be rich text and be branded, or really any complex routings of notifications, you're going to have to code that too. So although there's config-based setup, there's a lot of stuff you have to code. Okay, so moving on to fluid approvals. That is this one little section under AWE. Fluid approvals is a great little piece, little application that lets people interact with AWE routings. It's browser-based. It's PeopleSoft page. So basically, you using fluid approvals, you get a tile on your home page that, when you click on it, brings you into, again, it's fluid based, so it brings you into a list of your pending approvals. And when you select an option on the fluid approval page, it will allow you to act on that approval. We're not going to that approval page yet because that's the next tool, the approval page composer. There are config aspects of fluid approvals. Basically, you can register AWE transactions to use fluid approvals. The registration can be a little bit tricky to get that to work, but it is configuration based to register a transaction so that the approvals for that AWE transaction actually show up in the fluid approval tile and are accessible to your end users. And that brings us to Page Composer. Here, the last little tool that we'll go through. This
Paul?
again, yes.
Paul, I'm going to interject. We've got a couple of questions coming on before you jump on to Page Composer. So the first one, has there been any mention of Activity Guide Composer being released for financials and supply chain?
That's a great question. So Activity Guide Composer was built for HCM, and there has been discussion of adding Activity Guide Composer to enterprise components, but I don't believe it has happened yet. I would expect that it will. Oracle is investing in activity guides on an ongoing basis. So yes, I think that will happen. But some activity guide work has been delayed because some of the team that was working on it at Oracle got repurposed to do COVID-19 remediation. So so I think that might be put off a little bit.
Okay. The second question that we've got, and this is the last one right now,
Mm-hmm.
How much development, if any, will be needed to add an eForm to an activity guide?
Once we finish a widget that there are a couple of little hooks that if you started right now, you would have to build. But we have an active project going right now that is developing those hooks. Once we've developed those hooks, you won't have to do any development in order to hook it in. All you need is in the config settings, you'll follow our instructions to add our delivered hooks, what will be delivered hooks, to the configuration in the activity guide. So that, and basically that will just help manage the state of the form, so that so the first time you bring it up, it'll be in add mode, and the next time it'll be update or view or evaluate. So we've already done that in proof of concept, and it looks great. So we'll have that delivered and available shortly. So if you are interested in that, please let us know, because we'd love to work with you to make sure that what we build works for your use case. Did I see another question drop in there? Oh, just great answer. Thank you. I'll take that. Okay. So Page Composer, Fluid Approvals, again, just showed us the list of things that I need to approve. Page Composer is what comes up, builds what comes up when you click on that link. And again, the name is Approval Page Composer, because all you can build with it are approval pages. You cannot build just a regular PeopleSoft page. And you can't use it to fill out a form page. So it's not a tool to build a page to gather form data. It is only a tool to show form data to the approver. So here's an example of that. It pulls data out of the database and shows that data in the Fluid Approvals application. And you can build fairly robust views with it, including some pop-up buttons here like we're showing on this page. Again, you can't use it to build form pages. It is just Approval Page Composer. You can only build pages that show data in Fluid Approvals app, and you can't enter data into those pages. There are config aspects to this. It is primarily config. You set up records that you're going to pull information from. You can choose a field layout. You really can only do a columnar field layout. You can't have repeating sections like grids. So if you need to show grid data, it's not going to work. You can, though, drill into detail pages. Tech aspects, really the only tech aspect is you might need to build a new view to pull in the data from. Assuming, of course, that you've already built a table to store the data in. Really, it's a config-based tool because if you know the records, either tables or views that the data is in, it's a pretty straightforward configuration-based interface to build an approval page out of that. But again, that assumes you've already built a page to collect the data and records in which to store the data. Okay, so this is the simplified view of these best practices tools that we've gone over. Here is kind of how this actually looks in practice. So this is expanded, and I'm going to explain a little bit what you're looking at here because there are a lot of colors. We have in blue the pieces of this best practices delivered 9.2 tools solution for a configuration-based form. The blue is what is functional or config-based. The red is what is technical. That's the stuff you're going to need a techie to build if you're building using delivered tools instead of GT eForms, for example. The green stuff is good. That means it is technically extensible. It's great to have a config-based feature that you can then add technical extensions to if necessary. It's better to have a green dot on a blue area here than to just be red, because if it's configurable, or if it's extensible, means that you can do the config but still add technical juju to it as necessary. I'm not going to go through all of this, but it runs mostly from left to right. You're going to have to get to the form. That's technical. Adding search and security is mostly going to be technical. You can accomplish some of that with pivot grids, but there's almost always going to be in practice some technical work that's going to be necessary. Your navigation, you've got in config, that's your activity guide. But you're going to be building the pages and fields yourselves, including the ability to manage data. That means, for example, pre-populating the form with data, updating the data on the form as data changes, updating other fields. Logic management includes hiding and unhiding fields, segments, pages, changing what's required or isn't required, doing calculations. All of that is going to be technical work. In approvals, you'll see I've got some halfway colors here. So for who, when you're determining who you route to, in practice, you're usually going to have to define that technically. Just in a robust form requirement, it's rarely going to work to just set up the configuration options that are available with delivered AWE. But it is technically extensible, so you can plug in app classes to figure this out. Same with criteria, deciding when it goes to a certain person. You do have completely configuration-based fluid approvals to figure out how to give the recipients a way to work the forms, and you can configuration-based show them the data. Although maybe we should have a sliver of red here because you can't show grid data with Page Composer. That would require actually some technical work. Notifications, this is a little bit outdated now with the new notification framework, but with the notification framework that's been available for 9.2 and for most people who are still on 9.2, you're going to require technical work to get any form data onto that notification, and you really don't have a good option to use rich text. Updating PeopleSoft after the form, usually you're going to run a custom form process, and in the end you're going to want to stick that data into a delivered PeopleSoft component. The right way to do that is using component interface and integration broker to manage the transactions going into those component interfaces. All of that's technical work. Then you have an underlying level of administrative and management structure You have some logical structure provided. Some you'll find if you build a lot of these, you'll end up building your own structure. The data storage, although the activity guide keeps track of status, you're going to have to build your own places to stick data, to keep track of logs, to be able to access any of that data via query is all going to have to be built. Managing attachments, the new attachment framework will give you some of this, but integrating that with a robust form solution is still going to require technical work, especially if you wanted to integrate with an external EDMS or a network drive. You do have an administrative console for AWE transactions, and there is an admin console for activity guides, although it doesn't really give you the ability, for example, to proxy in to help the user create or complete an activity guide. So overall picture, some blue, a lot of red, and some green. So GT eForms, those of you who are familiar with GT eForms, this will be. I'm actually not going to run through all of this, but I'm going to fast forward just to show you a few things. GT eForms integrate with the Fluid application. GT eForms is a bolt-on to PeopleSoft, and so it lives inside of your application. Allows you to build Fluid-based custom form applications that will give you a full Fluid experience. But additionally, that Fluid experience you can build those Fluid pages with configuration. So here's an example of a GT eForm page on a tablet that was built without having to do any Fluid development. And as we move along here, we can do lookups. We can do dynamic work to hide and unhide fields. I'm just going to hit play here for just a minute. As we fill out the form, we can have multiple pages. We can. I'm sorry. I'm just going to turn off the the view. You can link to this, and we'll have this available that you can watch this form to see, or watch this video to see a full demonstration of a GT eForm. But you can conditionally include pages, fields, segments, and all that can be done with functional configuration. So I'm going to move on from there and show you the difference here. So here is delivered PeopleSoft. Here is using GT eForms. Our goal has been to turn as much of this blue as possible, and we continue to work on that. This red section over here is a thorn in my side. I really look forward to finishing a configuration-based CI update. But you can see there are many more places where you can use configuration to build a custom form. A few to point out: starting the form, navigating to the form, all of that is configuration based. A functional user can create a new form application and deploy it without needing technical help, and that's huge. You can get get a form out on navigation where you can get to it through a tile and not have to have a techie build any of that. You can set up search functionality, and that often becomes technical if you're including security in it, but you can actually do quite a bit with config. I do see your question, Laurie, about features that are coming with GT eForms. I'll make sure to save a minute to answer that question. Thank you. That's a great question. The big change here between the last slide and this one is in pages and fields and data management and logic. That whole experience, building the forms themselves, is configuration based, and you're building fluid forms. You can actually build classic or fluid, but deploying as a fluid form does not require any technical development, and particularly it doesn't require any technical fluid development. You can also pre-populate those forms with data as configuration. In configuration, you can set up where data is going to pull from existing views and tables to populate fields on the form. And you can set up, as a functional user, you can configure complex, robust logical statements to determine when a field is required, when it is visible, when it's read-only. That applies to segments. It applies to segments of the page, groups of fields on the page. It applies to whole form pages. In many different places, you can configure logical statements to control the display of the page. Approvals, we've turned that almost all blue because we've added a layer on top of AWE. This says PS AWE plus GT layer. That additional layer lets you define in configuration very complex, very robust statements to determine who gets the routing, including, for example, saying, I want this to go to all of the approvers who are in this role who have department security for this particular department, plus this additional admin approver minus the subject of the form and the approver themselves, because we don't want them approving their own forms. You can set up that kind of complex statement as a configuration-based user. You can also use the same logic engine that we use over here in the page manipulation to set up criteria to make approval steps conditional. We leverage fluid approvals to deliver the notifications, and we can actually, and we're generating, when you're building these pages and fields, you're also building the pages and fields that will be used by the approvers. So you don't have to do additional configuration. They will see the pages that you built for the same pages that you used for entry. Form notifications are much richer. It's easy for configuration-based users to include form data in the page. And I made rich text red just because if you consider HTML to be technical, that was required. But actually with our most recent release with 3.3, this is no longer red. We have a rich text editor that you can actually build your rich text notifications in the pages. You don't need text to build that for you or write HTML. You have integration broker management that just happens automatically. That gives you task management so that you don't have to wait for your end users don't have to be constrained by whether or not the back-end system is available right then. They can still fill out a form. They can go in a queue to be processed when, for example, when payroll is done being run. We still have technical work that needs to be done to build a component interface and to write CI update scripts, but we provide a technical framework in which to do that. And you can see, I want to hurry and leave time for some questions here, but we have a much more full-featured logical structure and underlying administrative structure to manage these forms, including analytics to see across many form types how your forms are performing, a reminder tool to push out updated notifications, the ability to do bulk actions bulk approvals on across multiple form types, and a batch form tool that will allow you to start many forms at once from query process. So overall, again, GT eForms gives you a much more full-featured configuration-based custom form experience. And those green dots mean that anytime the configuration-based functionality is not sufficient for your feature need, it can be technically extended to accomplish any level of complexity that you need in your form. Okay, so just a quick wrap up here. GT eForms, again, this is your sales part of our presentation, but it's a bolt-on electronic forms framework. It's validated by Oracle, and it does not require any additional hardware in order to run. It's built in PeopleTools, so you have access to the code. You can see everything that's happening. You get configuration-based form creation and management, and native real-time access to the data in your PeopleSoft system, as opposed to having to build interfaces with an external form tool. And you can leverage your existing PeopleSoft workflow and security and infrastructure. You saw we used PeopleSoft tools everywhere that we could to keep it native, and then we've added flexibility on top of that. And of course, it's mobile. So a few other features I'll just pop up. I'm not going to walk through them right now. I'll leave them up there while I answer Laurie's question of advanced features that GT eForms is working on for our upcoming releases. We mentioned the ability to add forms to activity guides. That is definitely coming. A few things. Our next release is actually is going to be focused on performance. We are going to do a fairly quick release on form performance that will add a new dependency tree that will give you visibility into how complex forms, the pieces of complex forms, are interrelated, so that we can you can actually see the how a visual if is dependent on a field, which is dependent on a data pool, which is dependent on another field. All of that complexity will be managing, and we anticipate that we're going to be able to improve form performance and speed, particularly in, well, both building the form, opening the form, and navigating between fields. We're going to have a very marked improvement in that. So that gets our top priority, and then additional features that will be coming include more configuration-based edits for fields. It will include some more advanced integrations of queries and pivot grids. You'll have, like I said, the activity guide integrations. Oh boy, we've got a big long list, but we're always looking. Eventually, I want to have a configuration-based CI update tool. Okay, so a couple other questions. Let's see. We've got if a PUM or a PeopleTools version release changes the native PS native tools, how do users get updates from GT if the GT app needs to be updated? Also, what is the cost to customer in this case? So we have a very active code line. It used to be that we didn't have to make a lot of updates in order to stay current with PeopleSoft's native tools. Now with Fluid, as I said, there are changes to Fluid a lot of the time, and we have to make quite a few updates in order to stay compatible with Fluid. But we provide GTE forms on both a subscription basis for new customers and for grandfathered customers who have had the on-premise solution for a long time. We have a maintenance package that once you have that, you get those updates at no additional cost. So as far as cost to the customer, there is no additional cost beyond subscription and or maintenance. So if you'd like to have a quote as to what a subscription would cost for your organization, you can talk with Scott. He'll be happy to help with that. Let's see, did you guys use PeopleCode event mapping feature? We use event mapping for a lot of client solutions. We don't have to use event mapping for GTE forms based solutions because it's custom solution, and we already have a framework that is more robust than event mapping to use to include PeopleCode in the eForms process. We have a large array, really an API of PeopleCode hooks to include PeopleCode in PeopleSoft. Event mapping is great for extending the functionality of a delivered PeopleSoft solution. Next question is let's see, how will the forms developed from GTE forms interact with a PeopleSoft upgrade? Are these forms seamless to the PS upgrade? Yes. GTE forms, first off, if you build a completely config-based solution, it's just data, and it's data in our own bolt-on tables, so they have no impact to the PeopleSoft upgrade. If you build custom, if you extend those forms with technical features like the PeopleCode hooks that I talked about, those again are in custom objects that don't impact PeopleSoft. The only places where you may need to do an update with the PeopleSoft upgrade is if you have scripts that are updating a delivered PeopleSoft component and that component changes. So we're not actually going to break PeopleSoft's upgrade. PeopleSoft could break the form by changing the structure of a component that we are updating. Usually that's pretty quick to update. It's just like if your user process needs to change, then the script that replaces that user process with automatic data entry will need to change as well. It's usually a couple days of work on a PeopleSoft upgrade at the most. So yeah, in general, this is a bolt-on. It does not impact your PeopleSoft upgrade. It gives you a lot of stability in with your custom information. I am over time.
Paul, did you see there are a couple of quick questions in chat?
Oh, okay.
And they're related to the enhancements that you listed off. One is, what release is the batch form load in?
The batch tool is a framework bolt-on that is available for, I believe, any GT3.x release. So just check with us. It doesn't install with our default install. It's a bolt-on install, but it's covered by your license, and so just get in touch with us and we can get that to you. And what kind of conditional-based edits and query integration? That's a question about about my forward-looking statement, which I should have given a safe harbor qualification to. Conditional-based edits, we intend to build at a field level the ability to use a visual if to say whether or not whether or not the data that's entered passes an edit. So you'll be able to say, based on, again, testing the value that was entered, you'll be able to use a visual if to determine whether that, you can check it against the values of other fields and such forth in order to be able to say, yes, this is valid data, or no, it is not. So that's the conditional-based edit query integration. And I don't know, again, if this is this won't be in the performance release. It may be in the major release following that. But query integration would include anywhere where you say, like in a data pool or as a lookup or as a search record, that you can put in a view or a record. You would also be able to put in a query definition. So instead of having to create a view, a custom view to get a particular lookup on the page or a particular data pool, you'd be able to put in a query definition. Okay.
That's it.
Very good. Thank you very much for attending. Sorry to run you a couple minutes over, but we appreciate you being here, and please get in touch with us, and if we can answer any additional questions. Scott is the best person to talk to because he answers his phone very consistently and in email. So scott@gideontaylor.com is a great way to get in touch with him. If you are new to GT eForms, take a screenshot, type that in, and or download the webinar in order to see about an additional GT eForms demonstration, or you can visit our YouTube channel. Very good. Thank you all for attending. And thanks, Scott.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon. You bet. Thank you, Paul. Good job.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.